It may take me a second or two to get through it. It's a passage from the preface to your book, The Macho Paradox. Women in the United States have made incredible and unprecedented gains over the past 30 years in education, the professions, business, sports, politics. The multicultural women's movement has utterly transformed the cultural landscape. But at the same time, restrictions on women's ability to move about freely are so pervasive, such a normal part of life in the post-60s generations, that many women don't even question it. They simply order their daily lives around the threat of men's violence. And when you read that, it's success, failure, this dichotomy. How did we get to where we are today?
Well, thank you for having me for this conversation. I appreciate that very much. And these are obviously important and gigantic questions. But one way I think I might, illustrate the context for what you just read is that I do a lot of trainings on college campuses and in communities with men and women, and I do a lot of talks. And one of the things that I developed years ago was an exercise where I would put a male symbol on one side of the big whiteboard, a female symbol on the other, and I would ask the men what steps they take every day or on a regular basis to prevent themselves from being sexually assaulted. And most men say nothing. I mean, I've done the exercise hundreds and hundreds of times, and you get almost no response. Now, men are sexually assaulted, but men don't say, I do X and Y and Z on a daily basis. But then you ask the women the same question, and this is in the United States, right? In the United States, what do you do every day to prevent yourself from being sexually assaulted? And the board fills up completely with things that women do. Whether it's, looking under the, in the back seat of the car before they get in, or having a man's voice on their voicemail, or having, 911 speed dialed on their phone, or just on and on. The things that women do is incredible. And I think part of the challenge in the work that I do is that it's become so normal to them. So many women in the United States think it's just normal that you just got to do this. You got to lock your doors. You got to get inside your car. You got to don't take a first floor hotel room. Just on and on the things that women do, and they don't really think about it like that it's a political issue or that it's a social problem. It's just what you do. And so part of my work is trying to say, wait a second, we have to take a step back and say, this isn't normal. It shouldn't be like this. We should question this, and in particular, men should be aware that this is the world that women and men live in. It's not right, and there's something we can do about that.
Well, you know what's so interesting about that? When you talked about that, and I started thinking about this, I know women who have keychains with the mace and all of this sort of thing, and as a guy, you think, wow, she's really smart. You don't think, that's messed up. Right. I mean, when you do it like this, as this exercise, I mean, the light bulb must go on for the guys, right?
Exactly, and I designed the exercise initially as a consciousness-raising exercise for guys, because a lot of guys will say, well, these are problems. I understand rape and sexual assault and domestic violence are big problems, but they're not problems in my life or in my family or the women that I know. Meanwhile, a lot of guys don't even know, number one, that women in their lives have been affected, because, a lot of women don't share that information. Like, they don't tell their male friends or even sometimes their husbands that they were, sexual assault survivors from earlier times in their life or what have you. But a lot of guys will say, it's not a problem in my family. Meanwhile, their daughters, their sisters, their and certainly at the university level, their fellow students have this checklist of things that every day they're worried about, the potential for being sexually assaulted. So yes, it does affect boys and men, and it does affect the women around us. And it is a powerful exercise.
I read a quote from you. I'll read another quote. Because I started thinking about this when you were talking about this issue. Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression. Those words came from Senator Robert Kennedy in 1966. In the cradle of segregation. He went to South Africa, gave that speech, and we've seen apartheid is gone. So you know the effect that these tiny ripples can have. When did the light switch go off with you? When did you say, this is one way to attack it? I mean, what got you thinking about the bystander issue?
Well, I became involved in this work, if you will, as a young guy, as a college student in the late 70s, early 80s. But my passion from the beginning of my sort of consciousness shifting on this, my passion was, how do we get more men involved? Because I saw clearly, once I started realizing how common sexual assault was, like on my college campuses more generally, and in the world, really. Once I realized this, I thought, where's men's leadership? Why aren't there more men speaking up about this? And I realized that that was one of the things that I could provide, because I had a background as I was an accomplished young, high school football star and stuff. And so I had the platform when I was young. I had the credibility, if you will, to know about male culture, and I wasn't intimidated by it at all. Anyways, I knew we needed more men to speak up. And when I started the MVP program, again, back in the early 90s, in the sports culture, I didn't want to replicate the idea of going into a room full of men or young men and pointing my finger at them and telling them, don't rape women, don't abuse women, because I don't think that's an effective strategy. I mean, I think I wanted buy-in. I wanted guys to like be inspired in a positive way to be part of the solution, rather than be defensive if they're being, pointed at as part of the problem. And the bystander approach, which had been pioneered by a professor of mine in graduate school and his colleagues in the prevention of middle school bullying. They were looking at middle school bullying prevention, looking at all the kids around the perpetrator, the kid who, doing the bullying, and they were looking at all the kids around the victim or the target of the abuse or the bullying. And they were calling this approach the bystander approach. It brought everybody in the community or in the school culture into the conversation. I and my colleagues took that approach from middle school bullying and imported it into the sexual assault and relationship abuse field, because I thought it was a really effective strategy to get guys to reduce the defensiveness that so many men feel around these issues. And it was a way to positively challenge guys to say, there's something that we can all do. That's basically how it happened. In my experiences in male culture, I know how powerful the role of the peer culture is in policing boys and men into conformity with certain norms, even if they're not comfortable with them. Because I know that a lot of guys go along with behavior that they don't like, because they're worried that if they speak up, they're going to be seen as soft or not one of the guys or not playing for the home team or taking the side of women in the battle between the sexes. So I think a lot of guys hesitate and they don't say anything. And this approach is a way to push them to say something and say that the person who speaks up is not soft or weak. He's a strong, self-confident person who's a good person who just sees injustice, who sees abuse, and he figures out what he can do about it.
And the media has covered some NFL players for alleged abusive practices towards women. In those cases, I mean, I guess, just to use one of them, Ray Rice, who was this Baltimore running back, there was this video. I mean, it was in the elevator. And it seemed like the NFL kind of brushed it aside. I mean, what's happening in terms of society about really addressing this and stepping up? And I know you talk to athletes and you talk to these coaches. Are they getting the message?
Well, the incident that you speak of, where Ray Rice, the former Baltimore Ravens, star running back, was caught on videotape. First videotape was him dragging his then fiancée, Janae Palmer, who was unconscious, out of an elevator in an Atlantic City casino, and then he was given a 2-game suspension by the National Football League in response to that video. And there was a large outcry, like, oh my God, he only got a 2-game suspension, but then the second video was released, and the second video showed him actually punching her in the face. And as a result of the second video, there became a new conversation that happened. After the first video, people said, oh, something must have happened in that elevator, and we're not sure what happened. There was a lot of minimization and denial, the suggestion that it was a domestic dispute, meaning it was a mutual combat situation, and maybe he just went a little bit overboard. But after the second video, which showed him actually punching her and knocking her out in the face, there was lots more of an outcry. And one of the things that I think is a positive step that happened as a result of that video being released is that a lot of men in the National Football League, coaches and players, and former coaches and players, and other sports journalists, publicly on camera started criticizing Ray Rice and saying, this guy went over the line, this is unacceptable, and he needs to be facing the consequences, and we really do need to get our act together, because that is not okay. Up until that point, and I've been working in professional and college and university athletics for 25 years. Up until that point, what you see in the vast majority of cases where an athlete has assaulted a woman or been alleged to have assaulted a woman, the vast majority of cases, the coaches and teammates will say things like, our thoughts and prayers are with the family. We're really concerned about them right now. They're going through a tough time. Nobody would criticize the behavior. And so, but the fact that they criticize the behavior, I think, might be a tipping point. And I think there's so much that the athletic culture can do because they play such a powerful role. And look at all the youth sports teams all over the world. Look at all the coaches who work with those kids, girls and that work with girls and boys. But certainly, look at the coaches who work with boys. How much influence those coaches have with those boys, and how much that athletic experience has to do with how those boys learn life skills and ideas about what does it mean to be a man. And if more athletic organizations take this on as part of their teaching, part of their mentoring, globally, really, that's a really important part of the change that has to happen.
That's one of those tiny ripples of hope. We're going to have to leave it there. But Jackson, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mike.
When we come back, our researchers take on the link between feminism and the male mystique.